Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. As South Korea-U.S. trade negotiations stall, major sticking points remain, especially over how Korean investments in the U.S. will be structured. The talks, initially aimed at easing tariffs and protecting key export sectors, are now delayed, with ripple effects already hitting Korea's auto and steel industries. The U.S. is applying pressure through the same high-stakes model it used with Japan, raising concerns over economic control and sovereignty. And with hopes for progress at the UN General Assembly fading, global attention is now turning to the upcoming APEC summit, where Presidents Trump and Xi are expected to meet, potentially shifting the direction of global trade. Now, for a deeper discussion on this, we connect to Kim Mok-yeon, professor at Seogang Business School. Big welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And also joining us is Han-Hyung Lee, assistant professor of economics at Montclair State University. Good to see you, professor.
Good to see you again.
So let's start right away with Professor Kim. The tariff negotiations between Seoul and Washington is on stall currently. What are the current points of contention, especially over how Korean investments in the U.S. should be structured?
I think Korean government and U.S. government has an agreement on how much they're going to make an investment. But the issue is that who controls Korea's investment in the U.S. and what kind of financial safety issues we can have protection in Korea when we're trying to make an investment. Basically, the U.S. government is trying to push for Japanese-style model in which the U.S. has a strong control over where and how the money used. But the Korean government, of course, they want more flexibility, phase funding, and especially for the safeguard. So a big outflow does not shake its currency and banks as it is our financial status. As Korean President Lee, he warned that accepting the current demand structure could risk a crisis like IMF crisis in 1997. So basically the Korean government is asking for the guardrails or basically the safety. So they're trying to have the full swap issues in the foreign currency exchange, but the US is trying to asking more where they want to control their investment in the US territory.
Right. Now, speaking of who gets to control a lot of the factors, let's take a look at Japan's case. You know, they agreed to a $550 billion investment MOU that basically gave Washington control over how the money would actually be used. Then, Professor Lee, why do you think Japan has accepted those kinds of terms?
Yeah, as you know, July 2025, Japan was one of the first countries to actually come up with this tariff agreement of 15%. And that was from the demand from the United States that without this investment pledges that there was going to be an increase in tariff rate to 25%. So there was no really option for the Japan, and they lowered it to a 15% tariff in exchange for the $550 million investment. And since then, there has been some confusions where there was an issue with the tariff stacking, whether the 15% that was agreed between the two countries will be actually added on top of the existing tariffs, or whether it's going to be a 15% across all industries and products. Later on, the confusion was cleared out, but obviously because Japan was one of the first countries to do so, it's been an important role and really from the perspective of Korea to see what Japan is doing. And in September 2025, an MOU was signed between the two countries where Japan will kind of look at, and also the United States will also talk about who gets to control some of the investment profits, given that the US is interested in the profits in the United States and what investment and how much investment will be actually made. And without any promises, what if Japan somehow does not follow through with some of the investment amounts, then the US might also raise the tariff rate. So in that regard, as you can see, some of these agreements are important for Korea because it sets the precedent, and future negotiations moving forward, it's an important factor for Korea as well.
Yeah, right, definitely. So Japan's example could tell us a lot about how Washington is approaching Seoul right now. So then, regarding this, Seoul has actually stressed that its situation is quite different from Japan's. Professor, do you think this argument from Seoul will carry weight in Washington?
For my personal assessment, it probably won't carry much of weight because the United States is quite focused on their own trade deals and investment agreements as the key focus of this issue is the national security. And without this, notion that, what kind of benefits Korea can bring to this table, where probably some of the sectors we saw with the shipbuilding industry being an important factor for Korea, and Korea does have some advantage since that there is a U.S. and Korean Assembly and Congress agreed of course, FTA, where it's an actual law and enforceable thing, where the two countries will have no tariffs. But with the given new trade and investment environment where we now have a national security issue, it's difficult to make a case there. However, there's also optimism that Minister Yeo has a background in policy with the Moon administration as well as a policy think tank in Washington. So there's no doubt that he and his counterpart will work out a nice deal. But obviously, he also has to be very careful with his comments with the media interviews as well. But with all this taken together, we have to know that moving forward, Korea and U.S. will be in a talk, and we'll have to see what will come out on top after these negotiations.
Right, so we'll have to keep close eyes on the developments. But let's kind of touch upon the impact of the latest decisions. So Japan's car right now face just a 15% U.S. tariff, while Korean cars are still at 25%. Professor Kim, how much does that widen the price gap, and what kind of impact could it have on Korea's auto exports?
I think it will hurt the competitive edge for the Korean car manufacturers. Basically, if we are giving an example, if a car costs $30,000 before tariff, and then we're going to add tariff for the Japanese car, 50%, then it's going to be $34,500. But Korean cars, basically, we're going to have the 25%, and it's going to be $37,500. That's going to be a $30,000 gap on the same pre-tariff price. So when Korean manufacturers and Japanese car manufacturers compete in the U.S. market, basically our Korean car manufacturers will have some disadvantage on this the price sensitive market of the U.S. Indeed, it's very price sensitive market, but indeed they're very competitive market in the U.S. In the U.S. car market. Well, the German manufacturers and the U.S. manufacturers and the Japanese manufacturers and of course the Korean manufacturers, where they compete and they trying to have some edges, especially in the price. But due to those kind of disadvantage on the tariff, basically, the Korean car manufacturers will have a lot of issues on this competition in U.S. market.
Right, so it's quite concerning. The price gap sounds like a real competitive disadvantage for Korean automakers. So in light of this, Hyundai says that it will boost U.S. production from 40% to 80% to deal with the situation. But Professor Lee, do you think a company moves alone could make up for this? And what else do you suggest?
Well, companies do have the ability to move along in terms of those investment pledges, especially for foreign direct investment to the United States from a Korean multinational like Hyundai, where the company has the ability to expand. They already do have the plants in Georgia and Alabama and other states. That means that they can expand on the existing platform and infrastructures. And at the same time, Hyundai has been receiving state grants and subsidies from the U.S. side. So it will actually help. And given the promises during the July letter from the President Trump saying that there will be some lax regulations and some of the low regulations on those permits. So actually Hyundai may see some advantage to more business in the United States. Obviously, this came probably in response to some of the tariff threats where they're trying to reduce uncertainty in this investment environment. So that it makes sense to see that that's happening. At the same time, we have to also consider what's happening within the domestic side for Hyundai's production cost. We are seeing that some of the regulations and laws targeting the workers in South Korea is affecting the bottom line in Korea for Hyundai, and therefore they may have more advantages. So now we have push and pull factors for these investment decisions, and I think moving forward that's an important consideration to have.
Definitely. Now, let's also shift our focus a little bit to the steel industry. So we are aware that it's also under pressure with a 50% U.S. tariff. And the government has announced a support plan worth 400 billion won. Professor Kim, will that actually help steelmakers on the ground itself?
Well, in my opinion, like the steel industry is one of the hardest industry that is going to be hit by the U.S. tariff. Well, they raised it into the 50%. But I think those kind of the government guarantee program will be help, of course, as a in the short-term period. But it's not going to be cure basically for the long-term perspective. Well, in the 50% tariff can add hundreds of dollars per ton, pricing some exports out. But the 400 billion guarantee, it's going to give them liquidity and some credit support so that our steelmakers can survive. But Hyundai Steels, where they trying to make they made an announcement and they're going to establish their steel plant in the Louisiana in the U.S. The U.S. mainland, but we are not sure that how long it's going to take, how long they can manufacture those kind of steels in the U.S. soil. So in the short term, of course, it will help us and help the steel industry to have some, basically to have some short-term solution. But I think in the long-term size, well, if it's gonna 50% U.S. tariff less, well, I think we're trying to find some more solutions so that we can eliminate, or at least we can minimize those kind of bad impact for the high percentage of U.S. tariff.
Right, so definitely there needs to be some long-term support for that. Now, on the UN General Assembly, many had hoped for progress on the tariff deal there, but we are aware as of now that there's no summit between President Trump and President Lee, and no tariff talks, of course, leading to that. So without that, how can we actually expect a breakthrough, Professor Kim?
I think, well, in the big picture, I think is the negotiation is done, but what they're working on is trying for the more details. Like we're gonna make an investment, I think it's already decided. But when you're gonna make an investment as a Korean government side, well, how about the currency exchange? Well, basically we want to have some swap lines with the U.S. So we trying to have some safety when it's going to make a bad impact on the Korean government, Korean's economy. Basically, we're going to make an investment so that the Korea and the U.S. can have some win-win, have some synergy impact on the both economy as well as the overall economy. So I think it's kind of help Korea find some breakthrough. In addition, especially for the when they're going to have some breakthrough, I think, well, the regulation or we can have some support for the state level, like Georgia. Well, basically, the U.S. government is going to be impacted by the Georgia, Alabama, Texas governors, of course, where they're trying to look for more jobs. But Korean companies, if they're going to make an investment in those kind of the states, where I think our Korean government can get support from those kind of local government.
That would be definitely helpful. Now, on the other hand, President Trump and President Xi actually spoke on the 19th and said that they also raised hopes for easing the U.S.-China trade tensions. Professor Lee, what do you think pushed the two sides to start looking for some kind of common ground?
I think the direct implication from those conversations from President Trump and Xi was that there are economic hardships from tariffs from both sides. American companies are facing hardship due to the tariff, where U.S. firms have to import in order to export to the rest of the world. And because of these tariffs, now we're seeing that some of the product prices are actually higher, and some of the competitive advantages for these U.S. firms are going down as a result of that. And at the same time, as you can imagine, China also has some of the interest in the U.S. economy, and so that economic hardship shared by the two countries has been a big factor for those more of an advanced talk. At the same time, both countries agree on the issue with fentanyl, which is a big issue in the United States about trying to stop the illegal imports of fentanyl into the United States, where China has been recognized as one of the major sources there. So, and I think both countries want to at least reduce that flows as well. Now, moving forward, this is not the first rodeo for both countries. U.S. and really China has already experienced the first trade war during President Trump's first term. Now, moving forward with President Xi's implications. Now, obviously, the APEC summit is about a month away, so there a lot of things can happen. And especially with the TikTok sale, it's still unclear what will happen, especially whether or not there's going to be some U.S. interest and U.S. firm buying a share of the TikTok, the ByteDance. And now that's a big issue here in the United States. And that's going to be something we have to look forward to before the summit as a major issue in terms of the global investment affecting the United States and also in China.
Right. So when it comes to U.S.-China ties, small or big discussions are very important for the global trade landscape we're seeing. And in relation to that, actually, we're looking ahead to the APEC summit, and both President Trump and Xi are expected to be there. Professor Kim, do you think that meeting could mark a real turning point, not just for U.S.-China ties, but also for the global trade overall?
Of course, the trade war between the U.S. and China is basically the starting point for this kind of tariff war between the U.S. and China. So, if the President Trump and President Xi they expect to meet in Korea in the APEC, of course, well, we are looking at some good signs when they're gonna have some solutions regarding those kind of tariff issues. So, for Korea's perspective, we are very interested in the semiconductors industry. Basically, due to those kind of issues, our semiconductor industry is kind of in the sandwich position between the U.S. and China. So those kind of the good sign or the gestures between the U.S. and China, basically, I think it's going to have some good signs for the U.S. economy, Korea economy, as well as the global economy, and it's going to be beneficial for the all over the world.
That will be a big picture outlook, and we will be watching closely whether APEC can actually set the tone for global trade going forward. I'm afraid we'll have to conclude our discussion here at this point. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, Professor Lee, we appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.